Good evening. Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to be back together in person after a hiatus of almost 3 years. I think we'll all be reflecting on these past 3 years for years, decades to come. I know I'll certainly be processing them for a long time. As I think back, though, what I'm filled with is gratitude. Gratitude for all of you, for your support, your partnership throughout these challenging times. Gratitude for the amazing colleagues that I work with every day. David Entwistle, President and CEO of Stanford Healthcare. Paul King, President and CEO of Stanford Medicine Children's Health. The amazing clinical department chairs and clinical faculty we have, and the staff of the most dedicated health professionals in the world. It's been a trying time for all of us in healthcare, but the support that I have felt from our community, our Stanford Medicine community, and you, our broader community, has been palpable every day, and we can't say thank you enough. I think even before COVID-19, most of us had the perception, the concept, that this was the century of the life sciences and biomedicine. But if there was ever any doubt about that, COVID-19 should have removed that doubt. And there's so many things to be thankful for that in less than 11 months, we went from the publishing of the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus to an emergency use authorization for the first ever RNA vaccines. Now we know, though, that those advances, as impressive as they are, and the partnership between the government and industry and academia, which made that possible, as impressive as all that is, it was on the backs of, and as a result of, decades of fundamental and translational research that enabled the acceleration of that process. And that's really what we in Stanford Medicine are all about. It's about doing the very best research from discovery to translation to bringing it to the benefit of our patients in our healthcare delivery systems. Tonight, you're going to hear from 3 amazing faculty, each of whom is going to describe to you the passion that they have for their work, for their accomplishments, and most importantly, for the future, for what they plan to do, and we know they're going to do in the future. And it's because of the support of you and our broad Stanford Medicine community that we can support faculty like this, to make transformative advances, to think outside the box, or as one of our faculty members said, at Stanford, we don't even know that there is a box, and to bring those advances even more rapidly and effectively to the benefit of patients. Another point that's been underscored during COVID and made so vividly apparent is the inequities in health and healthcare that exist in our society and more broadly around the world today. And it should come as no surprise that those of us in Stanford Medicine are also dedicated to addressing those health inequities and to having an impact through the research we do. And there's so many different ways in which we can have that impact, from the development of a novel vaccine here by Stanford faculty that has no cold chain requirement and also can be administered intradermally rather than intramuscularly, and so doesn't require health professionals to administer, to the work we've done in our communities around us in San Jose and the East Bay to provide access to vaccines and testing in communities that previously didn't have that access, to the health policy work that our scholars are doing to look at the policy-related matters that make it more difficult for certain underserved members of our community to access care in the way they should be able to. And yes, to address the disparities in healthcare that exist based upon race, ethnicity, gender preference, and so many other historical disparities in health in our country. Our faculty, our people, have just as much passion for bringing equity to healthcare as they do for bringing the very best science to health and healthcare. So thank you again for being here this evening. It's now my pleasure to introduce a member of the MD class of 2026 and a fellow cellist physician scientist, Melanie Ambler. Melanie?
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. Thanks for being here tonight and for performing for us.
Thank you for having me. This is such a wonderful opportunity.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your story, when you started to play the cello and what you've done in both the cello and in music more broadly, and also your desire to combine music with medicine?
Yeah, it would be my pleasure. So I started playing the cello when I was 8. I'm 25 now, so it's been 17 years of love at first sight. And I grew up just really loving my music and also becoming interested in the sciences and in medicine. And those interests existed separately for almost the entirety of my education until I had the opportunity to attend Brown University for undergrad. I studied neuroscience there and played in a string quartet. And I took one particular class called Artists and Scientists as Partners, and that changed the entire course of my education. In that class, we were really encouraged to explore the intersection of music and medicine, and the arts more generally, and that fulfilled me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and really changed my life to focus on putting the research and information that we have about music and medicine into practice. So after graduating, I spent a year in France on a Fulbright fellowship, and there I did a project looking at the impact of music on memory in patients with 2 different kinds of dementia. That was incredibly rewarding and great to live it up in France for a little bit. And after that, I had the wonderful opportunity to attend Stanford. In between, as you all know, the pandemic happened, and as someone that was just coming into the medical field, I didn't have much skill medically that I was able to provide during this time when all of us were strapped for resources. And so I decided to start a virtual concert series where I was essentially a musician on call, and I worked with a critical care physician out of Denver, Colorado, and I would be on call at my house, ready to play whenever there was a critically ill patient that they thought might benefit from music. So I would play one-on-one Zoom concerts for these patients. Thank you. Thank you. And some of the stories from those interactions I hold very near and dear to my heart. There were some patients that were in their last hours, and I was able to play for them and their family members as they all connected at once when they weren't allowed to visit, which was incredibly moving and special for me to be a part of that really important part of their lives. And so over the past 2 years, I've played one-on-one concerts for patients and also group concerts for healthcare providers in both the United States, Canada, and France. And as a result of that, I would play these weekly concerts, and every single time I would play a concert, I would end with the same piece. And that piece is called Sun Up. It's originally written for 6 cellos, and it's a piece that brings so much optimism and light into my day whenever I play it that I really wanted to share it with whoever would listen.
That's wonderful.
So I forced them to listen to it every single concert, every week. The same people and different people would sign on. And over the course of these 2 years, I've received photos of sunrises from all over the world. And I would ask the members of these concerts to close their eyes when I would play and picture the sun rising over their happy place or their favorite place on earth. And photos kind of started flooding in, and I have this slide deck of 100 sunrises that I will share with you tonight, and play Sun Up to accompany it. So I guess don't close your eyes for this one because the photos
You won't be able to see the pictures then.
the photos are pretty nice, but if you'd like to close your eyes, please feel free. I will. And I'll picture my favorite sunrise. So I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for performing for us tonight. Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. Boy, that sure is a tough act to follow. I first came to Stanford in 2004 as a clinical fellow in hematology, blood diseases. And right away, I was working in the hospital under the care of senior physician, training of senior physicians, in the care of patients with acute leukemia. And as I started learning about the way that we approach treating these patients, we give them chemotherapy for a week, but it's so intense that they need to be in the hospital for a full month. As I started learning about the clinical trials and the history of the therapy that we were giving, I was astounded to learn that it had been studied and implemented in the early 1970s. And that's when I was born. So I decided, wow, this disease, AML, acute myeloid leukemia, this is what I wanted to focus on in my research. And for my research, I joined the lab of Irv Weissman, the director of the Stanford Stem Cell Institute, and a pioneering scientist in the field of stem cell biology, blood, and leukemia. And we set out to try to understand what was really different between leukemia and leukemia stem cells on one side and normal blood and normal stem cells on the other. And in order to do that, I was able to take advantage of technologies and innovations that Stanford really pioneered. Our knowledge and understanding of blood stem cells from Irv, methodologies to take human patient samples of leukemia and be able to grow them in mice in a way that modeled the human condition. And then something called microarrays, a new technology at the time that allowed us to interrogate or understand the different types of genes that were involved in the disease without knowing which ones to study ahead of time. And it was these studies that then led us to the identification of a molecule or a gene called CD47. And that CD47 was much higher in its level on the leukemia stem cells than on the normal blood stem cells. Now, we weren't the first to come to CD47 in terms of its biology, and what was known was that it was an important regulator of aspects of the immune system. Now, we've learned a lot about our immune systems during the COVID pandemic, T cells and B cells, but there's another type of cell in the immune system, macrophages. Now, we like using these fancy terms in biology, medicine, and science, macrophage from the Greek, macro, big, phage, eater. These are the big eating cells of the immune system. And their normal job is to ingest, digest, and get rid of dead cells, debris, dying cells, as well as pathogens. Now, of course, they can't do this in an uncontrolled way. They have to have a system by which they're regulated. And CD47, it turns out, is one of the most important mechanisms by which these macrophage cells are regulated. CD47 on any cell will link with a different protein on the surface of the macrophages and thereby instruct them not to eat. CD47 is this don't eat me signal. And the leukemia cells, we postulated, had adopted this mechanism to evade being eaten. And that led to a very important hypothesis that had therapeutic implications. What if we could block that signal? Block the CD47 signal. That means that the macrophages would eat the leukemia cells. So we set out to test that in an experiment using an antibody, another type of a protein, but very specific for CD47. And we went to the lab, and I was working with a very talented medical student, Mark Chow, at the time. And we set out to do an experiment. We took those mice I described earlier, into which we had put human leukemia cells. And we took a sample of blood on day 1, and we treated them with the antibody, and took another sample of blood on the second day, and we're analyzing for the presence of those cells. And so Mark, really talented student, carried out the experiment, was going through the analysis. He came to find me in another part of the lab and said, well, you know, I think there may be something wrong with the way I did the experiment. I said, okay, let me come and take a look. And I went to the machine where we do the readout, and he's like, I can't find any of the cells. And I made sure, and sure enough, he had done everything right. And I turned to him and I said, well, I guess you cured the leukemia. A eureka moment. How often does that happen in science? It was really remarkable and started us on a journey to understand how to implement CD47 blocking therapy, not just for AML, leukemia, but it turns out for many other cancers. Now, Stanford really enabled the next steps. We wanted to make a therapeutic that could go into patients. So we set up a team, we got funding from the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, and we conducted the preclinical development of an antibody suitable for human clinical trials and brought it into first-in-human clinical trials at Stanford, the first place where any patients were ever dosed with this type of therapy. Fast forward now many years later, the molecule, the drug, is now in late-stage clinical development in the hands of Gilead, a local biopharma company, and carrying out now late-stage trials with the hope of getting FDA approval so that this therapy can be available to patients throughout the country and world. And the most recent clinical data from the trials in myeloid diseases like myeloid leukemia, approximately 200 patients, has shown that about 70% of the patients treated with this therapy are having real responses, and about half of those are complete responses that have led some of those patients, thank you. Some of those patients otherwise ineligible for bone marrow transplant are going on to that therapy, and some of them are seeing long-term remissions. We don't like to use the word cure, but certainly we're optimistic these patients are really benefiting. So where do we go from there? That project and program is really advancing now in the arena of clinical development. And here at Stanford, I think about, well, what are we working on? Why Stanford for me? And I'll tell you, Stanford for me is all about how I love discovery and discovery science. And for me, Stanford is my love of mentorship, mentoring students, fellows, and even early career faculty members. But really, what it's about for me at Stanford is that I want to see our science translated to patients for their benefit. Now that notion, science translated to patients for their benefit, that is the ethos of Stanford Medicine. That is why we're here, and that's why Stanford is so special. Now, it's not only the CD47 program that we take science to patients. There are many initiatives now going on. The IMA, a new initiative through the School of Medicine and the university, trying to bring advances across a range of diseases, not just cancer, whether it be infectious diseases, cardiovascular, neurosciences, and other areas. In the Stem Cell Institute, and I'm delighted to say that I've recently stepped forward as the new director of the Stanford Stem Cell Institute. Thank you. And we're working on regenerative medicine and cancer stem cell related topics across a number of disease indications. And it's really my privilege and honor to take on this role after my mentor and colleague, Irv Weissman, founded the Institute and led it for 20 years. So who really knows what the future holds, but that's why they call it research. Thank you.
When I was 5 years old, I was totally enamored with Star Trek. I wanted to go where no man had gone before. I wanted to have Scotty beam me up. And I wanted to wear those ridiculously cool outfits that they wore on the Starship Enterprise. But most importantly, I actually wanted to be Dr. McCoy. At age 5, I knew that he used data to take care of his patients and to get the best outcomes. understood that he mapped out disease, mapped out the physiology of the body, and he put that information together to cure his patients. The irony is that when you think about Star Trek, that was one of the earliest portrayals of precision medicine using data. So 50 years later, and yes, I am over 50, I still love Star Trek, and I am considered a seasoned educator and surgeon, and I still really appreciate the value of data. I understand how it works in all of the care processes that I participate in, and it is the basic foundation for medical decision making. So simply stated, data facilitates excellence in patient care. What's really interesting is that there's actually one data type that's missing in the medical record, and that's haptic data. What healthcare providers and physicians actually do with their hands. And I'll give you a story that may help understand why it's important. One night I was on call in the emergency room, and there was a critically ill patient that came in who had just been in a major motor vehicle accident. And as soon as we saw the patient, we thought, oh my goodness, this patient, we're gonna have to crack the chest. So I look at my senior resident and I said, you get the scalpel, I'll prep the chest, we have to get in here really quickly. And she opened the patient's chest and his heart stopped beating. So she reached in and she started squeezing and doing manual massage of the heart, and then it started beating in her hand and she let go and we watched for a second and then it stopped again. So she grabbed the heart again and started squeezing it, and then it started beating and then it stopped again. I'm like, oh my goodness, let me take a feel. I want to see what's going on here. And I get my hands in there, and as soon as I put my hand in the chest, I feel a hard blood clot on the anterior chest wall pressing against my hand and the heart. I asked for the Metzenbaum scissors. I cut the tissue open, and this dark blue clot comes out, and then I'm squeezing the heart, and then this time the heart keeps beating. And it's beating strong enough that the patient regains vital signs, and then we have enough time to get to the operating room to take care of the rest of the injuries. Thanks. When I think back to that experience, the irony is that everything was moving so fast. There wasn't an opportunity for me to have a teaching moment with the resident to figure out why they didn't feel the blood clot. Had they never felt it before? Did we not, teach them? Were their hands actually not really deep enough? And it's hard to tell. And that exchange, the things that we did with our hands to save that patient's life, was not captured. There's no data. There's no data for me to train the resident. There's no data for me to share with my colleagues. This doesn't happen every day. This is a rare event. So there's probably some surgeon, 10 years before me who had that one experience in their lifetime, and we don't have the opportunity to share that information. What I will tell you is that data represents an opportunity for us to have a database of physician performance. And without that database, we actually can't shorten the learning curve or move more quickly in terms of exchanging information and tips and tricks among surgeons. May sound like a far-off thing, but I can tell you, for us, we expect to have access to this data from athletes. This is data that has existed for over 60 years. We have baseball cards, we have dashboards. We won't even watch TV if there's no stats portrayed about what the athletes are doing. We follow their stats, we know it, the coaches use it, the players use it to guide their training. And think about the Olympics with no data. It just wouldn't happen. There's no such thing. So there is a framework and a mindset around performance measurement, haptic and motor data for human performance. And what we're doing in our research lab is actually now putting sensors on surgeons. And so we have sensors on their gloves, sensors on their brain, sensors, any wearable sensor technology. We have tried it in the operating room, in a simulated operating room, and we collect their data. And I can't just sit here and talk about the data without showing it to you. So what you see here on the screen is the motion data of a surgeon who is performing a simulated laparoscopic ventral hernia repair. The area that you see here is the hernia site. This is where the patient is located. The surgeon is located in this area, and their hands are in the laparoscopic instrument, and you can see the motion data going from the surgeon's hands to the hernia site. And then this other area is hands near the Mayo stand, which is a smaller table that holds most of the most commonly used surgical tools. And then there's a bigger table in the back, but we wanted to capture just the Mayo stand because that's where all the quick action is between the surgeon and the scrub tech. This is the motion profile of an expert laparoscopic ventral hernia repair. And now I'll show you one that's not so expert. And when I show it to you, immediately you'll see a difference. So what you see here, same regions labeled, but you start to see there's a lot more motion going on here near the Mayo stand. And you also see a lot of back and forth between the Mayo stand and the hernia site. And when you're doing laparoscopic surgery, if you're spending more time at the Mayo stand than you are with your hands in the laparoscopic instruments, something is going wrong. So what you notice is that there's also this whole other area of motion that's taking place that doesn't even appear in the top performer's motion profile. And it turns out that this person made a critical error at the beginning of the procedure. They made the skin incision a little too large, and every time they moved the instruments a certain way, the laparoscopic instrument and the port would come out, and then they'd have to put it on the Mayo stand, take the instrument out, put the introducer in, put it back in the patient. And they did this several times until they said, okay, this is crazy. Then they sutured the hole on the abdominal wall smaller so that the port wouldn't come out anymore. Now, this wasn't detrimental to the patient, it just cost more time, but as you can see, we don't miss anything with this data. And if you had this data, we could capture the learning curve and shorten the learning curve between surgeons. What's also interesting is that if I had 5 top performers in this exact same procedure, their motion profile will look exactly the same because the level of efficiency and where the Mayo stand is and where they're standing with respect to the patient, those are fixed points. However, if I asked those 5 surgeons to explain to me what they did in that operation, you would hear 5 completely different explanations. Because when surgeons talk about what they do, they focus on what's most interesting to them in terms of the anatomy, and they focus on their instruments. We love our instruments. So we'll give you this story, and all the stories will be different. The motion data is the pure standard data that actually is better than verbal language to describe a surgical procedure. So verbal language is actually inadequate data that's not standardized. So if you think about the motion data, it is pristine, and it gives us an opportunity to do research and to do comparisons that we've never been able to do before. Ladies and gentlemen, what I have just shared with you is that there is a new data stream that can serve as an important addition to data that already exists in the medical record, and this will greatly facilitate the quality of care that we provide. Athletes have it, airline pilots have it, all the elite professionals have it, and in medicine, we've got a ways to go. Philanthropic support would accelerate our ability to use this across multiple specialties in healthcare, and we've done a lot of this work on federal grants. However, philanthropic support can accelerate it much faster than we can with government funding. And I know I can't present this work without dispelling a very common myth. A lot of people think, oh, wow, that's really great data, but doctors don't want to be measured. Guess what? In the past 10 years of my research career, the physicians line up by the hundreds. I have thousands of physician data in my database of performance with a variety of wearable technologies. And they want the data. They all want to be the best that they can be. They just don't want the data to be used against them before they have an opportunity to use it for their own improvement and for information exchange for training, as well as sharing tips and tricks. Precision healthcare is here, and there is technology that already exists. The data is pristine, and the physicians are ready. Let's do this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, what an honor to be here. It's an incredibly beautiful event and such amazing speakers to follow, incredible cello. And the things we've been hearing about are things that really would have been impossible 10 years ago. The precision medicine, stem cell research, the way we're monitoring every motion of a surgeon. And Stanford really is taking on the impossible and bringing things to a new level. And what I'm going to talk to you about is how we're also at Stanford moving towards the impossible task of overcoming all needless blindness on Earth. Half of all blindness on our planet could easily be treated and restored to perfect sight. There are 18 million people blind from treatable cataracts that we can restore perfect sight to for $50. So why do you have a picture of a mountain behind us? Well, I was always kind of a outdoor kid. I ski raced, rock climbed as a kid, became a fairly fanatical rock climber. And this is a picture of Mount Everest. And when I was in medical school in 1983, I got invited to go on a trip to try the first ascent of the last unclimbed face on Everest. Everest is a three-sided pyramid, and you always see pictures. The previous one was from the north, and the South Pole route is the one you always hear about. But the eastern side is the largest and steepest face on Everest. It was really considered absolutely impossible. It has a 5,000-foot buttress at the bottom that is technical climbing similar to climbing El Capitan, but at altitude. And in 1983, people had never really attempted anything at that level. So how do you take on impossible? Well, first you have to have the background, the training. You have to have a great team. And we weren't necessarily the best 9 climbers in America in 1983, but we were an amazing team. And we all believed that we could take on the impossible. And you start with the first step. And we were able to make the first ascent of the east face of Mount Everest. Our route still has never been repeated. And it's also the only new route accomplished on Mount Everest without any Sherpa support whatsoever. And that was long ago. But it was something that really sort of opened my mind to the possibility of taking on really huge challenges. And it also, traveling to climbing in Asia, climbing in Africa, really opened my mind to the disparity between access and quality of healthcare to the haves and have-nots of our world. I also had the good fortune to meet Sir Edmund Hillary, who became a good friend. And he was one of my heroes, not just for his climbing accomplishments, which are really myriad beyond Everest, but also for what he gave back to the people of Nepal. He built hospitals, he built schools. And I worked as a doctor at the Hillary Hospital in Phaplu, Nepal, which it just so happens in 2 weeks I'll be back doing cataract surgery at the Hillary Hospital in Phaplu, Nepal. But my experience working there was really, in some ways, incredibly exciting, but also very frustrating, because I had children die of things that would be so easy to care for in the West. I had children dying from diarrhea, from pneumonia. I had women who died with me in childbirth. And I was just on the cusp of returning to the States to pursue a PhD in public health when I saw the miracle of cataract surgery. Now, in America, cataract surgery is not a big deal. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience who've had cataract surgery. Modestly, it's something we do fantastically at Stanford. Our cataract surgeons are all amazing at Stanford. And it's just, you get a little bit blurry vision. Oh, it's a cataract, you get it fixed. In America, we have one eye surgeon for every 18,000 people. But in Nepal, it was just accepted that you get old, your hair turns white, your eye turns white, and then you die. And this is what a mature cataract looks like. And a person with a cataract like this would only see the shadow of light and dark. They couldn't see the motion of a hand move in front of their face. People got depressed, shriveled, and waiting to die. And the life expectancy, once you go blind from a cataract like this, is 1/3 that of age and health-matched peers. And one of my really darling patients, Patali Gurung, I thought she was in her 70s. She was all shriveled, depressed, waiting to die. And a Nepali term for a blind person is a mouth with no hands. And when you're in a subsistence agrarian economy, a mouth with no hands is a huge burden, not just on the individual, but on their whole family. It takes a person out of the workforce, often a child out of school. This is a child who will never get an education because he has to take care of his blind father. And I watched a Dutch team come in, and they did cataract surgery. And Patali Gurung just blossomed back to life. It was the craziest miracle I'd ever seen. About 30 people in our village went from total blindness to perfect sight. And I went, wow, I've never seen a miracle like this in Western medicine. And I came to Kathmandu, and I saw that in 1989, there was no one in the whole country of Nepal doing modern cataract surgery with lens implants. So I came back to the States. I pursued a residency in ophthalmology. I did a fellowship in advanced cataract surgery and corneal transplant surgery. And what I didn't realize was that my partner, my elder brother, and really the genius behind anything I've been able to accomplish is this man here, Sandak Ruit, who has an adjunct professorship here at Stanford. And Sandak grew up in a hill village, 3 days walk from the nearest road. No electricity, no running water, no schools. And at the age of 10, he began his schooling. At 17, he earned a scholarship to one of the best medical schools in India. He scored #1 on the Indian medical exams, trained at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, then did a fellowship with the same doctor I watched in the Netherlands, and then a 2-year fellowship in Australia. And he came back to Nepal to start our program the year I started my residency in the States. And here in America, a lot of the best minds, you've been hearing some incredible things are going on in oncology and things going on in all different fields. We're kind of looking at how can we make our care 1% better for our patients, even if it's 100% more expensive. Well, Dr. Ruit and I started thinking about how can we provide 100% the same quality care at a cost that's affordable to the poorest of the poor in Nepal. One of the first things was figuring out how to utilize the resources. In America, when we take the cataract out, we put a little lens implant in that allows perfect focus. Well, at the time, in 1990, the least expensive lens implant on the world market was $300. That made it absolutely prohibitive to the poorest countries of the world. So we began manufacturing lens implants in Nepal, and with locally sourced materials, local manufacturing, local pharmaceuticals, we were able to bring the cost down to under $50 per surgery. And we began figuring out how can we reach the poorest of the poor. We began training at all levels and figuring out ways that a patient like this who lives days from the nearest facility can be carried to a place where they can get care. The numbers are daunting. There are 18 million people still blind with cataracts. But this is a woman who will no longer be a statistic. She will be 100% cured. That's one of the cool things about cataract surgery, is that it's a 100% cure. And we began really trying to figure out how to develop a system of eye care, training some of our best young doctors to do cataract surgery, then taking some of our best young cataract surgeons, training them to do subspecialties, retinal surgery, glaucoma, corneal transplantation, pediatric ophthalmology. And we started a full world-class residency in Nepal, but we also trained at all levels, training ophthalmic nurses, ophthalmic technicians in a 3-year program after high school, ophthalmic assistants in a 6-month program after 8th grade. And Nepal went from having 15,000 cataracts done a year in 1994 to over 350,000 cataracts last year. And what's more, we've been able to really develop a system of sustainability. It's been called compassionate capitalism, where paying patients subsidize the care of the poor. So we do about 40% of the patients will pay, and that pays for the 60% who get free care. And by doing extremely high volume, high quality surgery, we're able to sustain the whole program. The global burden of cataract or blindness right now is the 6th leading impediment to the world economy right now, more than malaria and tuberculosis together. And blindness really perpetuates poverty. And at the same time, the poverty really magnifies the suffering of those who are blind. And we've really been able to see this transformation. And Nepal is now the only large poor country that has reversed its rate of blindness. We spread seamlessly into Bhutan, which has had similar success, Tibet, India, Pakistan, and now sub-Saharan Africa. And we're taking people who are totally blind and not just restoring their sight, but restoring their lives and the lives of their families. And the joy, it's really hard to describe this incredible joy the moment the patches come off, and the joy of the family being reunited with the loved ones who can see. And I've now come to Stanford about 5 years ago. It's really the academic hub of how we're really trying to change global eye care. Stanford really is the global home of eye care training. And we have amazing collaboration here at Stanford. We have the ophthalmology department, led by Dr. Jeff Goldberg, is just fantastic. And we're world leaders in all the subspecialties of ophthalmology. But we also are a hub for innovation, and collectively, we're working with the business school. And the center is the Byers Eye Institute. But our spokes out from there, we work with the design school, the ophthalmic innovation fellowships. We have a global ophthalmology fellowship. We have a really close relationship with the Stanford Center for Innovation in Global Health. But we're also working on health policy. How can we spread cost-effective eye care around the world? We're working with the School of Engineering and Business. We're working with trying to develop big data learning and screening and ways that we can reach the poorest of the poor in a more effective and cohesive manner. We are looking at the return on investment and how much returns to the economy. We're doing a big economic study with the Department of Economics here right now, looking at, for every dollar spent on cataract surgery in Ghana, how much in the long term is brought back to the society. We're also trying to reverse engineer a lot of what we've been doing in Asia and Africa in terms of high-quality, low-cost delivery and reaching the poor to provide care for the indigent of our community, for the unhoused of our community, East Palo Alto and the Central Valley. And I hope some of you can sometime come on one of our Stanford outreach trips and see what we're doing globally. And just the joy. I've been doing it for 25 years, and still, the day when the patches come off, I actually returned yesterday from Tanzania and Malawi. And the joy every morning when the patches come off, people who've been blind often for 10, 15 years, children who've never been able to see properly, and then the patches come off and they can see. There's this like moment of hesitation, and then this incredible joy. Helen Keller said, "Just because I can't do everything, I won't refuse to do something I can do." And overcoming needless blindness is something we can do, one step at a time, one eye at a time. Thank you very much.
Well, here Ravi says, I hate to follow that. How could you on earth follow any of these amazing presentations? Let's give a huge shout out to Ravi, Carla, and Jeff. What an amazing job. I think about the science and what you heard here today, and think about the remarkable things that are being done. It is really quite incredible. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to Melanie. She did such a wonderful job. I will say I feel inadequate in my musical ability when you hear such amazing performances like that. But more importantly, what you feel is a result of that. Quite amazing. Well, it has been amazing, all of the wonderful things, and I want to echo what Lloyd said earlier. We had an amazing opportunity to be able to celebrate in some of the work that was being done. But let me also say thank you to you for the incredible support and the incredible work. Despite all that's been going on around us, think about all that's been done and the amazing things that continue to thrive at Stanford. It's amazing what we can do in medicine, and when you see that translated to the individuals that are getting the care, isn't that incredible on the things that we can do? I'd also like to extend a special welcome to some of our folks from our Stanford Tri-Valley team that are here tonight. This is their first opportunity to visit with us and be at this event, and it's such an amazing part of our Stanford Healthcare and Stanford Medicine system. I appreciate them being here and being part of this. Now, as we move to dinner, that part that you've been anticipating as well, I want to say I have a task for you. You're like, wait a minute, is there homework? I promise you won't have to remember any of this. You have a special scientist at each one of your tables. They're going to take a few minutes to tell you about some of the work that they're doing. And the task that I have for you is, I want you to question them on that work. Find out more about some of the remarkable things that we've been able to translate in this incredible work that they're doing. So, as we exit today, you're actually going to head out the same way that you came in, through the gates. We will actually have the team and staff that is here prepared to help guide you on your way. Thank you for being here tonight, and thanks for the incredible support for the amazing work that continues to be done. Mm-hmm.